All right, we're going to go ahead and get started. Welcome everyone to this workshop today. We are recording it simply because we have a lot of requests about this, but it pretty much is us and the screen, so you don't need to worry about anything. So this is the how to use iClickers in the classroom, and we are tag teaming because I am a instructor who has used it in the classroom multiple times and struggled with it and struggled with setting it up, and then discovered the wonderful resource that is Glenn. And Glenn is actually a representative from iClicker. You're a senior, what's your title?
Senior technology.
Yes, so he is the go-to. Yes, you'll all have his card. And he is the go-to for questions, very responsive. So what we're going to do is we're going to talk about why you should use the iClicker in the classroom. Doesn't matter what type of course you have, but why it can actually be useful for you in getting students engaged, how it benefits your students. And then we're also going to look at, as we go, I think one of the big questions is why or how can I use it to actually do good, not just engagement, but higher level thinking skills. And I think that's a very important question and one that we actually do address because it's important. And then we're going to talk about the logistics and what you need to do as instructor and setup and that sort of thing. So is there any other questions that y'all would like to see addressed as well so far that you're coming in with? Yes, ma'am.
Actually, I happen to being very impulsive. I wanted to use iClicker, and I asked all the students to buy iClicker, but it was sorry if I didn't say it too early.
That's okay.
But it was a disappointment.
Oh.
So, because I wanted to use it for attendance,
Right.
tracking attendance. So I always had also for participation in sports, and I always had a student came to me, oh, we've been there, but there was something wrong, or it showed like 50%, but they've been there, I don't know, 80%, or so we stopped using that. And also another colleague of mine, I taught a 400 class. Also in Psych 101, they had similar thing, and they said we stopped using iClicker.
Wow.
So I stopped using iClicker because also my reviews just because they said she was so disorganized. Because I encouraged them to use it, but it happens to be too much.
Right.
You know.
We'll address one thing I will tell you though about
pushed us to buy, and then you stopped using that.
Yeah.
So there was another.
Okay. Well, one thing I'll tell you about the reviews, it was an interesting article, I think it was about a month ago in Journal of Higher Education that talked about using student response, and what the short version is, they said that they did the same instructor using iClicker, not using iClicker. Student reviews were higher where they did not use iClicker because it was a much more scripted presentation. There's no breaks. You're just lecturing straight through. However, when you use iClicker, it's going to be uncomfortable on both parts, you and the student, because there are stops and starts, and you don't know where those stops are going to lead to. So in where they did use active learning, the student review, instructor reviews were lower, but actual performance on the part of the student was higher. So that's a natural outcome, and it's one of those situations where when you're using active learning in the class, it's just that. It's not here's my slide deck. I'm going to go straight through this today. No breaks, straight lecture. Because in essence, you're turning over some of your class to your students to give them the opportunity to tell you what they know, and more importantly, and what I think, if you ask me what's the single most important reason to use student response in general, iClicker in particular, is spotting misconceptions. What do students know, but more importantly, what do they not know? So I can deal with it right immediately then and there before we move on, because if I don't, a lot of those students in my classroom might not know that they don't know it until they get that first midterm or first exam, when it's too late in some instances to do anything about that grade that semester.
And I would also say that the first time I used it, it was a big mess, to put it nicely. And it's just a matter of knowing what you need to do, knowing what the problems are going to be. And I think having done it once, it would be much smoother the next time as well. And we'll talk about some of those.
The other thing I'll tell you about mobile really quickly is there are some classrooms, if you told me I'm going to be teaching in this classroom, I would tell you don't use our mobile solution, because Wi-Fi is just not good. But and that has nothing to, that doesn't matter. It doesn't matter what you're trying to use in that classroom. There's just not sufficient Wi-Fi capacity in some of these large classrooms to support a fully mobile solution. That's one of the nice things about about an iClicker is it's radio frequency, nothing leaves the room. If you're in range of the base, and as you'll see in just a minute, if you submit your response while the poll is open, it's going to be received by the grade book. And I had a conversation yesterday with somebody in psych that was in that scenario. They used it in Gambrell and Reef worked fine. They then used it in another building, which I can't remember, but it was over this way, and just said there was no capacity. Nobody could get on the Wi-Fi because it was down in a basement and the signal strength was just not good. So my recommendation there is, if you're going to consider using a mobile solution, find out who the IT person is that's responsible for that classroom. They can run a test and tell you, or they can tell you based on their experience, it's a good experience, you've got sufficient Wi-Fi, or you don't. I mean, I went over to a classroom in CLS building yesterday where a couple of their instructors are going to use it next semester. That's where I've been when I bumped into you. And we made sure that there is sufficient Wi-Fi because they are going to use mobile. So
the biology department uses it pretty extensively. So the students in biology at least seem to like it pretty well.
Yeah.
A good number of the professors use it.
Yeah, and the other thing about cost too is a clicker, once you purchase one, you can use it in multiple classes for no additional cost.
Yeah.
So I know all of you are from a variety of disciplines, but for example, chemistry 111 and 112 requires the iClicker. If they've taken a chemistry class, biology, it's very heavily used. Biology, most of the instructors give students the option of mobile versus clicker. If you take accounting principles 225, 226, you will have an iClicker too, because they don't allow the use of a mobile device there. And that's not for Wi-Fi reasons, that's for
Instructions.
well, it's just among other things, they just don't want mobile in the classroom. So
But still, they need to pay subscription, right?
only if they're using mobile. Once they purchase an iClicker, then there's no additional cost to use that throughout their time, as long as they keep that same device.
Okay.
Yep. So let us see whether y'all have experience or not. So Glenn is going to go through how to, what we want y'all to do is to do a clicker question. So go ahead.
Yeah, so just so you know, all of you on your desk have an iClicker too. That's what the bookstore stocks and sells now. The little orangish button is the on-off button. My device is blue because it is the instructor remote. Obviously, it runs iClicker, opens and closes the poll, opens and closes the results chart. I'll show you this. It's a laser pointer, and it's also a presentation remote, so it's multifunctional. So when I want to open a question, you'll notice on the screen here, this is the iClicker toolbar. This is what rides on top of whatever application you're using in the classroom. This is a PowerPoint, but there's nothing about this PowerPoint that is unique to iClicker. In other words, we haven't had to put that PowerPoint in any certain format. We haven't had to code it in any way so it can be read by the software. It's just simply two parallel applications that are running side by side. So when I open the poll, now you'll see when you turn your device on, if you tried to submit a vote now, most of you all are going to see a no base response on your screen. That's because you've got multiple frequencies you can set this to. So what you need to do is press and hold that orangish button for about 2 to 3 seconds until you see 2 large letters flashing.
So turn it on with the orange button, and then
just push and hold for about 2 to 3 seconds. And then after that, you'll hit the B key twice. And if you're successful, you'll see a check mark on your screen.
I see it's ready.
Yep. So that
ready?
yeah. So let's go ahead and should go ahead and close the.
So now hold and do BB. BB. There you go. All right.
All right. So now the poll is open. It's in count up mode, and you can go ahead and hit your A, B, C, D, E response. One thing I'll tell you, and this is a good thing to tell your students. Tell them to look at, if they're using the iClicker 2, to look at their screen. When they see the check mark, that is their signification that their response has been received. It's not telling them it's right or wrong, because not every question has a right answer. And in fact, you don't grade questions in iClicker until after they've been given. But what it does tell the student is, yes, your vote was received. If they're not sure, they can vote again. As long as the poll is open, your most recent response just writes over your previous response.
So go ahead and answer the question. 5 of you have.
So I can tell now we've had 5, 6. I can see. And again, the way this is going to help you as the instructor is, if you're in Michelle's class, you have what, 325?
210.
210 this time. So, you've got 210 students. As you see this number getting close to capacity, 175, 180, you can say, okay, class, you've got about 5 seconds left to either change your answer, submit a response, and then I'm going to close the poll. Because what happens when I close the poll, now if you try to submit a response, you're going to see on that LCD closed. So that's how you essentially use iClicker in class to get feedback. This is not a content question. This is just giving us feedback on what your level is. If I wanted to open the results chart, I can do that here, and you can see that we've got a little bit of a mixture. And you can drag and drop this wherever you want. Again, not a content question, but if we wanted to grade this question, we could. Anything we don't grade that needs to be graded, we can do that in session history after the class is over.
You navigated with your remote or she helped you?
Well,
You can do it both ways.
you can do it both ways. So see, if I hit B again, I just close the results. And so what this allows you to do, because it's a presentation remote as well. So well, I think Michelle's,
Sorry.
you just hit a. So if I wanted to,
So it's active by default, right?
yeah, so it's a presentation remote, because this is me advancing the slides. Obviously, it runs iClicker, and then it's also, as you saw, so it lets you get away from the podium. If you're somebody that likes to move around the classroom, you can do just about everything you need to do here. If you,
What's the result again?
yeah. But if you obviously if you prefer to be at the podium, you can do everything there.
That's what this button is to show the results. It's the same thing.
Is this result we choose? If this NBC comes from our.
Yes. You are submitting the results, and then if we wanted to grade this question, let's say that the right answer was C, we could either mouse click on it, or I can just scroll through, and then whatever I leave in green now, I've just graded that question.
Done. All of the answers are graded. Yep. So awesome. So yeah, and that's knowing that you have that blue remote. The first year I used it, I didn't use a blue remote. And then Glenn was like, why? And then that allowed me to not have to go back to the podium in a 200 student class and click on things. Just use the remote to do the exact same thing. It's so much easier. So definitely good resource to have. Okay, questions on how that works for that? Okay, and we'll go through some more in just a bit as well. So let me move this out of the way. So let me, first of all, from my perspective, putting your mind at ease. This is really easy to use. There is a little bit of setup in the beginning, but that's what Glenn is for. That's why we have so many resources for all of you to be able to do this. This does save you time, especially if you're using it for attendance. It's an automatic attendance check, but it's also a participation check as well as learning and engagement check. So you're doing a lot of things at once for you, especially for large numbers of students. I think this is really key. If you've heard about Top Hat is something that is actually put into the lecture slides themselves. This does not. It runs concurrently. You don't have to change anything with your slides. So you're not having to worry about making adjustments in PowerPoint. It automatically, with one click, and we'll show you this in a second, goes directly into Blackboard. It uploads all of those grades to you automatically. It's already integrated, so that's also very important. And as I said, Glenn and iClicker in general, support team are very helpful, responsive. You'll get if you email them, you'll hear back from them within an hour at the most, really. And then this cost, as Glenn was mentioning, they only have to buy this once. And so they don't have to keep purchasing a subscription unless they use the mobile device. But for just the clicker, they don't have to purchase a subscription every year. Once they have it forever. And some of the other platforms online are semester subscription services. So that's another consideration. Okay.
Let me point two things. This one is key. This is one of the things that differentiates both iClicker Classic, which is what we're looking at now, and then iClicker Cloud, which is our mobile solution. Most other solutions on the market, you have to upload or create your question content in their website. And so that means if you need to edit a question, let's say that you give a multiple choice question, you say, I just don't like the way that answer is worded. You've got to pull your entire presentation down, make that edit, then upload it again. Here, if we wanted to make a change to that last question, all we would have to do is edit that PowerPoint locally, and it's ready to go. So that's a much more straightforward process. The other thing I'll mention here in terms of low cost, just to hit on, I was up yesterday. Courtney Worsham, she's in the School of Business. She teaches marketing. She teaches typically the big intro marketing courses. Her student worker was in there, was a senior, and she made the comment. Now, granted, she's in the School of Business, and so of course but she said that this is her senior year. She's used iClicker 7 out of the 8 semesters.
Wow.
And in some of those semesters in more than one course. So by the time you do that, you're talking about, per year, student cost about $15 per year per course. In her case, probably, $7, $8 per course by the time she annuitizes it off across all of the different places where she's used it.
What it can do for you is it really does increase class engagement. You will always have the students where they're not doing anything, they hear you say, okay, iClicker question, they pull it out, do it, and go back. There's always those. But for the rest of them, they do say that they like it because it keeps them paying attention. It gets them to see, do they actually understand it or not? And it gets you to see whether they did. And then it also gets them to start thinking in higher level thinking processes that you're trying to get them to do in the first place. You get immediate feedback. So as y'all saw, how many got it right or wrong, you then can say, oh, let's go back and talk about this again if you had more get it wrong than you expected. As I said, and I'll show you in a second, you can do not just tell me the number of this or tell me who this person is, but higher level thinking skills, which is, again, very important. I already mentioned the attendance check, Blackboard integration. So we have some resources for you. One of the resources that you have in your pack of stuff is, I think it's the very bottom resource. This is at the University of Colorado Boulder, has actually done a resource guide for instructors. But what it does is not only does it talk about how to use iClicker itself, but how to write good questions and how to engage your students with those questions, covering them with the material, that sort of thing. So that's a really good resource to have for the class whenever you're teaching your class or you're part of the instructors of the class. So
let me
yes.
add one thing too. I know you all signed in, and I see a lot of you all are taking notes, which is great, but I'm also going to send a follow-up email, which will have a number of additional links to our support site, which has, recorded videos, screen captures, a lot of additional information there as well. So by all means, take notes, but if you miss something, don't worry, I'm going to get you to where you can have that information for review.
Yeah, great. So let's look at some of the question types you can ask. So one of the things, of course, you can ask knowledge of facts. But again, that's what we want to do that, but we also want to try and get away from that a little bit. You also can ask comprehension. So like you have a statement, which one supports this theory, or which of these is an example of something. But really what I have used it a lot for is whether students know something that you expect them to know and may not know. For example, with marine science or geology, how many of them know what plate tectonics is versus continental drift, stuff like that. Some major concepts that you think they come in knowing and they don't. So you have to change perhaps how you structure your classes. So here's an example. Now you're not going to need to answer these, don't worry. These are just examples for y'all. But so I'm asking in this one just some facts. So I talk about floods and flood frequency and severity. Which of these does not influence severity of a flood? Or this is one where I have them show me whether they understand what I talked about with the beach structure. So I say, all right, you go out to the beach, you're setting your chair up on the beach, where should you actually set it up where you're not being affected by waves and tides? And here they actually, comprehension and slide application. And then this is one where I find out what they actually already know or they misunderstand about content. In this case, when waves are moving, what is it that is actually moving in a wave? And most students tend to say A, when actually the answer is B. So that lets me see where I'm coming from with respect to student knowledge, okay? So what you can do with Clicker, which I think is just wonderful, is being able to get students to see the knowledge that they're learning in the class that you've been lecturing on or they've been working on, having them put it in situations where they're actually going to see it on exam, in problem sets, in real life, applying it in situations that they will actually experience. So one of the best ways of doing this is using questions where they have to remember what they just learned and then apply it in a new situation, called memory plus types of questions. And so what those questions can do is they can ask, why is it important to be able to do this, or why might we want to do this? Predicting and showing so they know something's supposed to happen. Well, let's put it in a different scenario. What happens if we do it this way? Or things that you have to factor in and consider in certain situations. So let me give you an example. This is when I teach tides. And so when I teach tides, one of the things they learn is that the position of the moon, the angle of the moon, called the declination angle, will change how big the tidal height is at a particular latitude. So once we go through that and we talk about that, I then say, okay, let's see if you understand it. I say, which of these latitudes will give me this pattern of tides? And so then I let them work together in pairs. They answer the question. Again, A, B, C, you can use this as a clicker, very good application. And it lets me see whether they understand how that actually works or not. Okay? See if I know the answer to that? You're like, oh my God. So the answer is actually C, because you have a high tide here and a high tide here, and it looks like that. So anyway, but it's one of those things where until they saw this on an exam or in a practice problem, they wouldn't be able to show me that they did or did not know it. So I am able to see it as we go in the process. A couple other question types. So perhaps after you've talked about something, you can see, as I said, whether they have an understanding of it, so you can build on what the students have learned during class or through several classes, or even applying outside of a situation or outside of class. And then applications, again, what would happen if we did this? What are these types? Which of the following are these types of certain situations? Again, I know I'm being very generalized here, but you can kind of see how these are a little bit higher level question types. Here's another example. So this is in physics. Here they have a diagram. And again, this is why I love iClickers, because you can do this. You can use diagrams, which is something they actually might see on an exam or a problem set. So they have to look at light rays and convex, concave lenses and predict what's going to happen if you change something from the basic knowledge, okay? Some more higher level question types, synthesizing. So here they understand all sorts of parts to a solution. How would you then test it? What would be a good procedure? Analyzing things. This would be good for things such as social services, health services. You're given a bunch of symptoms. Tell me what's going to happen next, or what should you do next? And then even skills of whenever you're solving problems, what's the next step in solving that problem? So here's a good example. This is one higher order thinking with nursing medicine. So you have this client who has these characteristics. Which of these things is most important for their care? So again, higher level thinking and application. And then this one is for poetry, where you have a poem and then they read it and kind of synthesize and are able to do inference with poetry as well. So you can use it for really anything. And then another higher order thinking, this is a graph essentially of proteins. Proteins have, whenever you put it into the genes and the genes code it out, what's going to happen. I don't know anything about this, but this is a great example from Virginia Tech. And so again, you can do higher order thinking with these types of questions, okay? So questions on the way that you can ask questions that we've talked about so far. There are so many good ideas out there. One thing I like to tell instructors is that I promise you that there are the really good application, higher order thinking skills questions out there. You just have to Google it and Google it with the right terms. And there's tons of online resources, web sources that give you good questions to ask that are higher level thinking for your discipline. And I can help direct you to those if you're interested in that, because we know where those websites are.
Yeah, the other thing I would add there, you see on my card, iClickers is part of Macmillan, which is Bedford, St. Martin's, Worth, Freeman. I know that all of our editorial and author teams are encouraged to put or designate either in the text itself or in the electronic supplements clicker questions that are designed to be effectively used with clicker. Most other publishers are doing that as well, so you may look there and see, and there may be some things already designed. There are a lot of blogs, a lot of sites out there, as Michelle said, in terms of where you can go to find good content to use in the class. These were some good examples of, I said, some high order thinking multiple choice questions to get at what we said, what I mentioned earlier, what was one of your 3 bullet points, the misconception piece of it. The other thing I will mention is one of the questions I'm frequently asked is, when and how many questions, should I typically ask in a lecture? When you've got those the big classrooms, 200, even 100, I mean, think about at the beginning of class, one of the things that you sometimes can be disrupting as an instructor is waiting for literally everybody to get there and get seated and get their laptops out if they're taking notes or whatever. And then the other thing that can be very frustrating is, let's say that this class ends at 1:30. It's not 1:30 yet, but there's a lot of people that will slap that, and it does one or two. My recommendation, good way to deal with that is always ask a question in the first couple of 3 minutes of class. Okay, that'll get students there. That'll make sure that they're ready to go when you're ready to go, as opposed to you having to wait to be ready when they're ready to go. If you ask a question towards the end, you don't have to do it every day, but if you do it, a few times, it will get those behaviors that you want to see of students hanging around, until class is over. I mean, we typically say a question about at least every 15 minutes. That deals with research behind attention span. If you think about it, the best lecture in the world, when you're sitting and listening to that lecture, after about 10, 12 minutes, your attention span starts to wane because listening to the lecture is a passive activity. On the other hand, when you ask a clicker question, all of a sudden it becomes, active. The student has to do something. And so then when you get to your next lecture topic, they're a little more refreshed and you've kind of reset their attention span clock and they're ready to go. The other thing we haven't mentioned yet, but I do want to mention, is kind of the little carrot that students get for using iClicker, which is you have the ability to award them points. And it's amazing what students will do for even, 3, 4, 5 points towards their final grade. So just the way you can award points with iClicker is for participation and then also for performance. And the difference between the two, participation is they either get that point or points or they do not for the class meeting by just simply responding to X amount of questions. The default is if you respond to 75% of the questions that you ask, you earn that participation point.
That's essentially the attendance part.
That's the attendance piece of it. Performance is for any content question, any graded question, they earn a point for getting it correct. Now, with performance, you also have the ability to award them something just for giving you an answer. In other words, I might say, I'm going to give you 0.25 for just giving me an answer, because so even if you're clueless, I need to know that you're clueless, because that's going to help me help you. So maybe you get 1/4 of a point for just giving me a response, and if it's correct, you get the other 3/4 of a point. So those two things combined together are how you can award points. You've got the ability to set a cap on the day. So you might say, I don't, however many questions I'm going to give, 5 is the most points you can earn from today's lecture. But the other thing I want to make sure I say here is, if you're thinking about using iClicker only for attendance, don't. Okay, and I'll tell you why. That's a very expensive way for a student to tell you they're in the room. And they're going to be very unhappy that they brought a clicker to class to just simply hit a button to let you know they're there that day. Yeah. The other thing I will tell you is, if you've gone to that level to have them use iClicker, because it's a really valuable tool to give you feedback and or to just ask some high interest questions just to stimulate some discussion around the topic that you're lecturing on that day.
Yeah. I even do, whenever I get ready for review sessions for exams, I have a 15-minute class and I have about 3-4 questions per that 15 minutes. And a week before the exam, one of my questions is, when is the best time for a review session? I get the distribution of when to do it. And so students are still very participatory and can give me all sorts of different feedback depending on the type of question that you ask. Okay. So let's go into logistics and administrative part. So I'm going to have Glenn go into this part.
Yeah.
So,
okay. So I can use this. So a couple of things that if you're going to use iClicker, first of all, you need to let the bookstore know. These don't magically appear in the bookstore, although they are not specific to any particular course or discipline on campus. The bookstore needs to know just so they can allocate appropriately. A couple of things, walk across here and grab this. I showed this one. This was the first, some of you may have seen this. This was the first iClicker that we ever produced. We were part of Macmillan. This was back in 2006, and we quit producing these in 2010, replaced them with an updated model. The thing I will say is if the device works, it will still work with our software. So I just want you to we've been very careful as we've updated the software not to sunset any of our devices. This is a bundle. The reason I show this is the iClicker 2 that you have there, and it's packaged with a 5-year access for mobile. This is one of the things that I had a conversation with the bookstore. They contacted me about, especially for incoming freshmen. This is really the best deal for an incoming freshman. given the amount of usage here, because if they purchase this as a freshman, regardless of what is allowed or required on the part of the instructor, they're good for their entire time here.
So they pay $15 for the.
If they're paying just for the subscription, the standalone subscription for iClicker Reef, which is our mobile solution, for 6 months is $14.99. If they purchase it in this bundle, for 5 years, they're getting 5 years for Reef for its additional $6 net. So that'd be about $8 with the bookstore markup. So they're actually getting a 5-year subscription for less than they could get a 6 month if they buy it standalone.
Yeah.
Full price on the remote. But this sells in the bookstore for $68. And so for that as a freshman,
$68, right?
correct. Yeah, but that's a one-time purchase.
Yeah.
Yeah. So as far as logistics, that's what you need to do on the bookstore side. As far as your syllabus, my recommendation is if you're going to use iClicker, explain how you're going to use iClicker in the first day of class. Talk to students about how they have the ability to earn points, and make sure they understand from the beginning that it is going to be part of the class. I also recommend probably best that you don't ask your first clicker question that counts for points until probably the third or the fourth lecture section. I would go ahead and ask some questions that don't mean anything, just to, especially if it's the first time you've ever used it. It's kind of like a preseason game in football. You can kind of experiment, and if you do something not exactly right, no harm, no foul. It also lets students realize, my instructor really is going to use these. And it also lets them go ahead and make sure they've got it, make sure it works, so that when you do start asking questions that count, everybody, for the most part, is on board and ready to go.
I just want to make sure. So the problem that I had, that they came to me and said they answered this question, but it was not shown there. So it could be because it was mobile app and Wi-Fi problem.
That could well be, because if you respond on a physical iClicker and you see that check mark, that was received. And
they can see the progress, the profile, or they can have a profile and see the progress.
yeah, one of the things we're about to get to is you have the ability to integrate your iClicker gradebook with Blackboard, and so that as soon as you upload your scores to Blackboard, then students can see whatever they've earned.
Oh, this is something that the instructor needs to do. They cannot have a profile
Right.
themselves.
Yeah.
Right.
But mobile app is so good, but
Well, again, it's
Yeah, I think it is, actually, because you were saying earlier that the Wi-Fi signal is intermittent. The signal for the clicker itself is actually constant.
yeah. So what we're doing here, running iClicker Classic, we're online because this is hardwired, but nothing is online. This is an entirely local solution. Nothing that you're doing is leaving the room, because that response is being received by the iClicker base. It's plugged in via USB to the presentation computer. The base is part of the Instructor's Kit that as a user you get. There's no charge for that. The kit includes the white base, which Michelle we're tethered, so we can't move it up too far. A blue instructor's remote, and then a student remote. The software that you'll use is specific to the University of South Carolina. The reason it's specific is there's some files added into the resources folder, which is on the software, which allows USC's instance of Blackboard and the iClicker gradebook to communicate with each other. And that does two things. That lets you push grades back over to the student, but each device, if you look at the back of your device right above the battery component, there's an 8-character code. And if you turn your device on, underneath those 2 big letters that are the frequency, you see the same 8 characters. That is how a student, and that's what a student uses to register their clicker, so you know what student is using what clicker in the classroom. Now, a couple other things I'll say about that. Students can share an iClicker as long as 2 students in the same room, but 2 students in the same room can't use the same device, because the clicker can only be registered to 1 person in this class. But let's say that my roommate, let's say that Michelle and I wanted to share a clicker. My class meets from 1 to 2, her class meets from 2 to 3. I could hand this off because same clicker ID, different name, and more importantly, different student ID, which is the key match when those grades are uploaded.
they need to register.
They do register, yes.
And that's how it connects that number to their ID number.
And they register that, and that registration happens in Blackboard. And once a student registers that clicker one time, that registration stays with them. So we talked about that. All I need to know is where you want your Instructor Kit shipped. I mean, that it can be some departments, some like them to come to the department, others not so much, because you get over Lauren, where you are, I still don't know the name of the buildings, you know, when I've left one and when I've entered another one. So if the home address works better, that's perfectly fine as well. This is key. I would tell you, if you go to iClicker.com, you can download our software, but that's not the customized version for South Carolina. This is where you want to go to download the version that allows you to interact with Blackboard. There's a Mac version, there's a Windows version here. I'll also tell you, is there anybody that crosses platforms, i.e. you lecture from a podium computer, which is probably Windows, but in your office you use a Mac? Okay. If that becomes an issue, we have a cross-platform version which lets you, it makes the transition for you. And then as far as syncing, the interaction with Blackboard lets you do a couple things. We've talked about pushing the grades over, but it also lets you download your roster from Blackboard. When you set your course up, essentially what you do, you log into Blackboard, you give the okay for Blackboard to communicate and to pass information to iClicker, then you can download your roster. So what that means is, after the last day to drop a class, you can download a fresh copy of your roster. After the last day to add a class, once drop had's over with, all of the dropping and adding happens at the Blackboard level. So you don't have to go in individually and say, well, this student's not here anymore, this student's not here anymore, add this student. So that all happens for you at the Blackboard level. So that's why I really encourage, it just simplifies things considerably using the integrated version.
So this is the settings. Did you want me to go somewhere else?
Yeah, let me show you a couple things here. So I can't do it here because my software that I'm running is not integrated with USC's Blackboard, but if it was, rather than saying general no LMS, you would see in parentheses, it's going to say something like USC and in parentheses Blackboard. And that's what you want to make sure is there. And then you click to log in. It's a one-time login. And so anytime you come back, it's going to take you back here. But let's back up just a little bit just to show you a couple of things really quickly. We'll talk about frequencies. This is where you set the frequency up. If you notice when you turn your device on, it's going to say USC CTE. That's what I named this course. I just did that so it would pop up on your remote. If you needed to change a frequency, there's 16 different frequencies. The reason you would need to change one is the base has a range of about 350 to 400 feet. So depending on where you're lecturing, you could have a situation where signals cross over to each other. If I needed to change the frequency, it's something as simple as just clicking on a different radio button. And so now it's doing a quick check to see if there's any other base. It should come back no, so now we've changed that frequency. And the other thing I want to show really quickly is points. This is where you set the points that I talked about. So again, the default is 1 point for participation, for answering at least 75% of the questions. You've got 5 different options you can choose from, anything from they have to answer every question to they have to respond to at least one question. And then this is where you can decide how you want to award performance points. And then if you want to put a cap on your score, you do that right here. So
that's where I go in and say, if they just respond, I give them half a point. If they also get it correct, I give them half a point. So that's my attendance plus actually getting correct at the same time for the total of 1 point. Okay.
So, once you've got those in place, you're going to click here to save it. Keep in mind, these are your default settings. This is what every session you run in the future is going to revert back to. But let's say after, 2 or 3 sessions, you decide, in hindsight, I wish I had done my points this way. You can always go back and change those on a session by session basis. You can award partial credit at the question level. You could, let's say that coming up in spring break, you might say that the Friday before spring break, I'm going to award double participation points for everybody that's here and didn't start spring break early. And then it would revert back to your normal scoring every session after that. So the other thing, let's say that I just wanted to ask a question on the fly. So I need to go back and reset my. So if I wanted to ask a question on the fly, I could, in the grade book, it's gonna take a screen capture of whatever is here. But let's say I do want to ask one. So I'm going to ask a true/false question. So I'm just going to open my poll and I'm going to say, if you want me to show you how to create a course, click A. If you're okay with that, if that's not something you want to see, click B. So the poll's open. I have changed the frequency to CB, so you will need to change your frequency. And your poll's open, and somebody's already done that and already got a response come in. Okay. Now I can tell one of the things too about the base is on the base, and I'll hold this up and see if you can see it, and I can't stretch it any more than this. There is a display. That display lets me see the results live as they're coming in.
It says no, but it's.
Yeah, you need to I changed. Remember, I just changed the frequency.
Yeah.
So
You did that?
push and hold for about 2 to 3 seconds, and then hit C and B consecutively. You should see a check mark.
C and B, right?
C and then B. Yep.
So I can see B.
C is in Charlie, B is in boy.
Yes, so we do it again.
There we go. Now you can so the check mark means you're on the right frequency, and you
Why
can.
you did that? Why you change the frequency?
To show that you can.
Oh,
Yeah.
okay.
Yeah, I did. So I've got 7 responses that have come in. I can go ahead and close the poll and show the results. And so it's close. So we got 4 that want to see it, 3 that don't. It's really quick. So it's pretty. So for the 3 of you that voted no, it'll be fairly painless. So if I want to create a course, I'm going to close my session. So what you're seeing here, I've got these are the courses that I've used for other things. The USC CTE is the course that we were just questioning from. But if I wanted to create a new course, it's going to simply clicking create. I'll name this. I'm going to create it. So theoretically, it's created and I could launch it now. But this is when I would jump over into settings. And I would say, okay, I need to set my scoring. I need to come over here to general. My Blue Remote has an 8-character code as well. If I wanted this to work to run this program, I need to put that number right here where it says Instructor Remote ID. If I did want to enable mobile, I would come here. Again, the way iClicker Classic is set up is if you don't enable mobile at this tab, then the student cannot use a mobile device in the classroom. That puts you in control of what device is or is not being used in your classroom. So, you know, and then the grade book, this is where I would come in and I would download my roster by simply logging into Blackboard and then selecting my course and pulling that roster down. So really just a matter of just a couple of seconds. It does not take long. Once you have the software downloaded, it's a pretty quick process to start and run a course. And then when I'm ready to launch the course, I'm going to make sure my course is highlighted. And one thing I want you to notice here, you see these 2 green buttons, you've got a green and a yellow. Green means clicker response is enabled. That means that there is a base plugged in and recognized by my presentation computer. So any student using a clicker, their responses will be able to be submitted. But I did not enable mobile, so I have a caution light next to iClicker Reef disabled. Now, if you look at the class we're actually running from, you'll see 2 green lights, and that's because I did enable mobile in this class. So again, good best practice. You're in that classroom of 225 people. I'm sure you all have had this. You get in the class and you have a bunch of students come up and they want to ask questions about the last exam. They want to ask questions about the next exam. My recommendation, go ahead and just say, wait 1 second, launch iClicker. If you're allowing mobile, make sure you see 2 green lights, start a new session. It's doing a search now to see if there's another frequency. If it finds one, it's going to give you a note it did not. It launched iClicker. Now answer those questions. That way, when you get into your lecture and you get ready to ask your first clicker question, you don't look around and say, oh yeah, I got distracted. I need to now stop for a minute and launch iClicker. It doesn't take long, but as you all know, it also doesn't take long when you stop for students to start doing something else, and then you kind of try to get them back together. Again, this is just to reiterate, this is you just see where we just inserted question slides into an existing PowerPoint slide deck. Over here. And I'm just going to put this back in.
Does it download like a little app to your computer when you connect the base to the computer?
No, I'm running, you can download the software to a flash drive if you run off a podium computer, which is what I'm doing. If you run off your laptop, you can run it directly off your laptop. Glad you asked that question, because in Classic, all the data that we collect from students is stored wherever the program runs from. So in this instance, that's the flash drive on my computer. So another best practice, if that's the way you're lecturing, when you get back to your office, you're going to want to have a copy of iClicker on your office computer. When you open the software up, there's a classes folder. Just drag and drop that from the flash drive over to your office computer, just like you would save a Word or an Excel document. That way you've got a backup. So worst case, you leave the class, you forget your flash drive, you go back to get it and it's gone. You've only lost 1 day's worth of activity off of your flash drive. I also recommend on the Blackboard side, updating probably once a week, again, for the same reason, just to make sure. Well, it's going to do two things. It's going to keep your inbox down considerably. Because if you've used iClicker before, you're going to get emails from students, when are you going to upload our scores? When are you going to upload our scores? So again, something else for the syllabus, let them know, hey, I upload scores, iClicker scores every Wednesday, every Friday, whenever it is. That, if you don't see them up there, if it's not noon on Friday, don't send me an email about when I'm going to upload scores, because I'm not going to answer it because you already know when I'm going to upload scores. So again, another best practice just to kind of help you deal with some of the questions you might get. So
you recommend that we hold the scores because if they don't use mobile, maybe they see the progress on the mobile app. But if they just use this, there's an instructor part that needs to upload the scores, right?
Well, if they're using mobile, you have the choice. If first you allow them, are they going to be able to use a mobile device? Yes or no. And then if you do choose to let them see a mobile device, are you going to let them see the question and see the results? Yes or no. You have the choice there. If they're using a physical clicker, obviously they're participating in class, and they'll see the results when you upload those scores. Now, the other thing I'll say is we're talking about iClicker Classic. Our cloud solution has some additional features which does allow anybody, regardless of what device they're using, to be able to go in and see their scores outside of class. So if that's something you're interested in, let me know, and I'm going to get you all additional information on both. But we're today demonstrating Classic because I had my finger on the. That's what Melissa is using in her class.
So I'm going to come back to this. What I want to show you, because Glenn talked about a couple of these things, is in your syllabus and discussing in class, you do need to do this. You need to let students know how to buy it, where to buy it, because you would think they would know to go to the bookstore, but they don't. And how you actually set it up and register it. Include in your syllabus information about which devices are supposed to use, if they can or can't use the mobile. As I said, how to register. This is what I put in my first slide, and then I have repeat it through the first week. It's required. This is the model. You have to register it. Be ready for the first real question on this date. Bring your clicker every day. And then I show them where they go in Blackboard to go register it and find the number. I'm very explicit about this.
And let me say this. There's a lot of moving parts here, but they're all very simple steps. Yeah. And this, I'll give you an example. This is literally one click, 8 key entries, and a second click to register the device. The first click to open the link, it's going to be an iClicker registration link. It opens this up. It literally shows them that this is where the clicker ID is. Take this number, put it here, click on submit, and you're done. And again, the other thing about this is, if you download your roster a week before class starts, especially in the spring semester, because we've already had a whole batch of new registrations in the fall, and then you sync your roster, you may well see in a class of 100, it's not uncommon to see 30, 40, 50 of your students already registered because that registration is already sitting in Blackboard. So then all you have to worry about is getting the additional ones registered. When a student responds, their response is saved and it's stored to something in the grade book. Okay, that something, until it matched to a name, is going to be the clicker ID. And so once a student does eventually register and matches that up, then those scores will go with that student. So, I know you all have students like this. You tell them, do this by this date, do this by this date, and they don't do it, they don't do it, they don't do it. And that'll be the very student that says, hey, why are my clicker scores not showing up in Blackboard? And then you come to find out, well, it's because you haven't registered your remote yet. So I tell you that to put you at ease that the scores don't disappear. They're stored in the grade book. It's just up to the student if they want those points to make that registration match, so you can then upload them.
And then say a student finally registered like by spring break, and they're like, oh, did I lose all those points? All you have to do is, once they have their name registered with the ID, the clicker ID, clicker and Blackboard goes back to the very beginning and brings all those grades for that person. There's nothing else you need to do. It's very, very easy. Make sure you talk about what the expectations are, how often they're used, that they're responsible for battery life, all of that. And then why you use them, showing them that you value this because it is a good learning tool, it's important to be what we call transparent. This is why I'm doing it. This is what you're going to do. This is how it's going to help you. So talk about that on your syllabus and with the students.
And Michelle, go back one thing. The thing I would say here about two things here: daily use or random. If you don't use your iClicker, if you're going to use iClicker but you only use it randomly, you should not be surprised as an instructor when half your students don't have them. That day you do decide to use them. So if you're going to use iClicker, use iClicker. You're training a behavior. I will say this too: if you do use it on a regular basis, the students are going to become to expect it. And I say it's kind of like working out. The first couple of times you work out, the next morning you're like, oh my gosh, but after you get to about that third week, the endomorphins kick in and you look forward to it. Students will, I think they'll tell you that I actually appreciate the clicker questions because it did get me to class. It did make me think in class, and it did help me know what I know and what I didn't know. And then as far as this, you probably say just two AAA batteries. So it's a common battery thing. But then tell students how you're going to use them and why you're going to use them. I've got one left in college. I'm in year 9 of a 10-year having at least one in college. And the thing I want to know, and what my kids want to know is, am I using the things my instructor's asking me to buy? If you're using iClicker effectively, that's going to be very evident by the second or third lecture. They're using these literally every day in class. So I think what will happen pretty quickly after you do that, you'll flip cost to value. So in other words, okay, I'm having to pay whatever it is if you had to pay for that device, whether it be mobile or hardware. But after you use it a few times and students see how you're using it, they're going to say, oh yeah, now I get why they're using that. So the cost becomes not nearly as big, if any, an issue as it might have been when they bought that the first time.
Yep, definitely. As Glenn has already talked about, make sure you decide how you're going to do attendance versus participation. Different people do different ways. Some people do 0.75 for the right answer, 0.25 for the attendance. It just depends on what you're valuing. What the percentage of the grade is from iClicker, I gave you in the packet of resources that you have. You have one that says the Quick Start Guide. We'll talk about these in just a second, but the last page of the Quick Start Guide is the sheet from my syllabus of how I use iClickers, what the expectations are, what the percentages are for my Geology 101 course. Tell them, as Glenn said, when they're going to be posted, otherwise you will be asked. You literally just sit down at your desk from the class and you get an email. Grades aren't posted yet. Oh my God. So yes, you've got to make sure they know what your time frame is as well. And also talk about academic integrity policy. Use of someone else's clicker is considered cheating, and so put that into your syllabus as well. Let me go back to, is there anything else that you might be interested in learning how to do or see with respect to clicker? How to set things up, connection, grade book perhaps, adjusting questions, we talked about that. Any questions that we've been talking about that you wanted more information on?
Can you tell us more about cheating? How cheating?
So cheating or use of borrowing someone else's clicker, or, well, if they don't register, but actually using someone else's clicker along with yours, pretending that they're in class, that's cheating. So it is an academic integrity violation.
Well, it's what's called clicking somebody in. And it's really easy to figure out, and I'll show you why. Because if I'm a student in your class, and I am sitting here, this is what I'm going to do. I'm going to vote here first, and then I'm going to be down here, clicking in my, somebody else. So if you're earning points toward the grade, it falls under the academic integrity policy. There are a lot of things you can do to dissuade this. One of the best ways, Leslie Hendricks, she was in the statistics department for years. She's now in the management science department. What she does every day is she just draws 3 or 4 or 5 names and calls those names out at the end of class and says, please come down front and please bring your clicker. And anybody that doesn't show up gets a 0 for that day because she knows that's somebody that's, and she looks at her results too. So wait a minute, if they have results, she calls the name, and it only takes a couple of times if somebody were getting around that will end that process. Plus, it's just like, can you tell in class when somebody is, if you said put your phone away, that somebody's sending a text? Yeah, because all of a sudden you know.
Yeah.
So I mean, that is an issue, but there are a lot of different strategies to get around that.
And some of the resources that come with iClicker as well as downloadable from their website is just a 2-pager getting started, quick start guide. I've used that several times. There's a downloadable iClicker manual. I gave y'all the table of contents from that so you can see all the resources. Very good, very easy to read, user-friendly resources. And then I also gave you a packet instructor guide, how to integrate iClicker with Blackboard Learn. So this is literally step by step. This is where you click. This is what you do to integrate your clicker, your class through Blackboard Learn so that it saves it and it loads it for you and you can load it every day. Okay. Other questions? John might have, yes.
When you upload the grades into Blackboard, do they show up in a different column for each class period, or do
Yes.
you make it so that it?
Let's do this. Let's jump into the grade book really quickly, and I will answer that question.
You can set it how you want it, but yes.
So my class is
Because
over.
it can get really long if you've got like one for every
Yeah.
class,
Yes.
and your grade book is like.
Yep, exactly.
So I've closed my session. So the one thing I want to show here, let's say that you didn't mean to close your session, or let's say that you didn't get as far, you're teaching 2 sections and you're trying to keep them together. If you see the resume session, that's going to resume the session you just left, whether it's today or whether when you come back on Monday, I've got to ask that last question from the, so they're on the same, and then I would close the session, open a new one, but that's what that is for. When I want to go to the grade book, I just need to make sure my course is highlighted. I'm going to open the grade book. Now, what you're seeing here, these are all what we call orphan remotes. We know they belong to somebody because we have grades associated with them, but we don't know who they belong to. And this is really meaningless to us as instructors. But you do see that there are points, and those points will stay tied to this clicker until we have all of our registrations in place and sync those. Does anybody look at you? Does anybody have a clicker that has a name written on the front of it? Anybody use that one? I don't know if I passed that one or not. Okay, I was going to say, so when you're ready to check to check your registrations, you can come up here. We're going to come here to here's our session. Let's go into our session history. So we've opened our session history. So this was we actually ran 2 sessions today during this. I ran the first one on the BB frequency, and then I launched a new session. We ran that one when I changed to the CD frequency. So we graded this first question in class, and you see what the results are.
And the other really cool thing is it takes a screenshot of whatever question was up there when you ask that question. So you don't have to worry about remembering what it was.
So you can just like flip through different slides or like different.
Oh, it could be anything. I mean, it could be,
Exactly.
I mean, you could jump into a website, you could show, I mean, I've seen where you show a YouTube video that has like a little red hard stop buttons, and then when it hits there, then you can pop a question up, and it's gonna, whatever's on the screen, that's what it's taking a screen
Exactly.
image of.
That's what it was. I know. I saw that. I was like, oh, that's awesome.
But let's say that on this question, I wanted to award, partial credit here. So I can come in now, and so what I've just done is anybody that voted B for whatever reason, I gave them half a point. So I've overridden my default settings. I haven't graded this one, but let's say I want to grade this one. There we go. If this is my bonus question of the day, let's do this. I could come up here and I could say, I'm going to give 2 points for a right answer today. This is my bonus question. I mean, so again, I've overridden my default. So I can come up here, and when I close out of this, when I scroll back in, you'll see some differences here. You'll see some people that got the half point where I changed those. What an AB means, that means that that device did not respond in that it's responded in a session that you run, but it didn't respond in that session. So you see a lot of you have responses for both. Some just have just one or the other. If I'm ready to sync my, if I click sync here, again, no synchronization because I don't have a roster in place, and none of these rosters were registered yet. But if they were, it would say you have X number synced correctly, and then you'd have a name that would be in blue, and then that device would be associated with it. Now, Lauren, to answer your question, you see I only have one sync button. It's a sync guy coming down. Your South Carolina button will have 2. It'll have sync roster and sync grades. And we kind of think that the LNS Blackboard lives up here. So we're pulling our roster down from Blackboard. And then when we sync grades, we're pushing our grades up. Now, when you click on that, it's going to ask you a series of questions. What do you want to upload? Do you want to upload just a cumulative total points, which would be whatever is here in the course total? Do you want to upload performance and participation separately? Or do you want to upload a column for every day? It sounds like you do not, because you don't want that column just to go on
Yeah.
forever. So once you make those selections and then click on OK, because you're integrated with Blackboard, Blackboard is ready to accept that upload based on the selections that you make when you click on Sync.
Just pops right in. Yep, very cool.